November 15th, 1209. Unable to sit still, I kept going to the window and looking outside, hoping to see my mother walking along the path toward home. She works as a teacher in a village school a couple of kilometers away, so she always comes back late. The sun was setting, the sky beautifully painted in shades of orange and pink, and the coolness of autumn could already be felt in the yard. And then I saw a human silhouette walking along the path. Looking more closely, I realized it was my mother, and I was overjoyed. I quickly put on my shoes, threw on my jacket, and ran out to meet her. My heart was pounding with excitement. I was always happy to see her, but this day was special. It was my birthday. So I kept wondering what kind of gift I would receive from her. As I got closer, I noticed that she was holding something carefully wrapped in paper. She smiled and, extending her hand with the gift, gently said, "This is for you, my dear." My curiosity was stronger than my patience. Without even waiting until we got home, I started tearing the paper as I walked beside her. Inside was a dark green notebook with a hard cover. At first, I didn't quite understand why this was the gift. My mother looked at me and must have noticed that I wasn't very impressed. Then she placed her hand on my head and asked me to promise that I would write down everything important to me, my thoughts, dreams, or moments from the day. She said that one day this notebook would become my treasure. I fell silent for a moment. It felt like a small commitment, but from her gaze I could tell it mattered to her. Not wanting to disappoint her, I gently nodded, agreeing to her wish. When I returned home with the notebook in my hands, I went up to the attic where my room is. I sat down at my desk, turned on a small desk lamp, and opened the first page. It was completely blank, so white and clean that it was a little intimidating. I thought that if I wrote something foolish, it would remain there forever, soaked into the page. Gathering my courage, I began writing these lines and felt that each word was gaining its own weight. I thought that perhaps one day when I am grown, I will open this notebook and see how my thoughts, feelings, adventures, and dreams have changed. It will be my inner world, one I created myself, but which began with a small gift from my mother. This day, my birthday, brought me not only a gift, but also the realization that true gifts are not toys or sweets. True gifts are moments, memories, people who care about you, and small traditions that can accompany you throughout your life. This notebook will become my story, my thoughts, and my feelings, a treasure that no one will ever be able to take away. And although I still don't fully understand its weight, I feel that it will become my friend. A friend who will listen quietly, will not judge, will allow me to be myself, and one day will help me discover everything that matters to me. December 6th, 1209. Father. It was a word I didn't say often. It sounded strange, like it didn't belong to me, but to someone else. When we had to draw our families at school, I would always freeze for a moment. I would draw my mother, my grandfather, my grandmother, and myself. And in the place where a father seemed like he should stand, I would leave an empty patch of paper, like a white stain in my life. When I looked at other children spending time with their fathers, being lifted onto their shoulders, taught how to hold a hammer or throw a ball, going to the market together on Sundays or fixing bicycles, I felt something like envy. Not a bitter or loud kind, but a quiet one, deep inside. The kind of envy that doesn't let you get angry, only makes you ask, why not me? Sometimes I tried to imagine what my father might look like. Would he be tall like my grandfather? Would his hands be rough from work? Would he laugh so loudly that the windows shook? Or maybe he would be quiet, serious, speaking little but firmly. Would he teach me to be braver? Would he tell me not to pay attention to other children's teasing? Or maybe he would simply stay silent and place his hand on my shoulder. And that would be enough. Sometimes I would get angry at him in my thoughts. How can you leave someone you haven't even met yet? How can you not know how he grows, how he changes, what he fears? But that anger would quickly fade because I had nowhere to direct it. All that remained was emptiness and countless unanswered questions. But instead of him, I had my grandfather. And perhaps that is why all my life lessons, all the small teachings about the world came from him. He taught me patience, that a good harvest doesn't grow in a single day. He taught me responsibility, that if you start something, you must finish it. He taught me to quietly endure what is difficult and not to look for someone to blame when things go wrong. He used to say that a person's worth is shown not by their words, but by how they act when no one is watching. Maybe I didn't have a father, but I had someone who taught me not with words, but by example. He didn't show me how to be a man, he simply was one. From him, I learned strength without anger, silence without weakness, and courage that does not need witnesses. Through simple work, through fatigue, through shared silence in the evenings, I came to understand that strength lies not in fists, but in the ability to stay and take care of what has been entrusted to you. And sometimes I think, perhaps it is not the one who gives life who raises a man, but the one who stays. May 21st, 12:10. School. I don't want to go back there. Yesterday and today, I told Mom that my stomach hurt. She looked at me as if she knew I was lying, but she still let me stay home. Maybe because she knows how hard it is for me there. There are only 17 children in our school, and my mom teaches all of us. Because of that, the other kids often call me names. One of them calls me the teacher's favorite. Maybe they think it's easier for me because my mom stands at the board, but they don't know how hard it is to sit at a desk when every grade or mistake you make becomes even more noticeable. Grandpa never judges me. That day when my stomach hurt, he just said, "Good that you stayed. You'll help me around the farm." He says everything so simply that it feels like everything will be okay. Feeding the chickens, giving food to the rabbits, carrying water to the animals in the fields. I enjoyed all of it. Even though the tasks seemed simple and sometimes hard, I felt needed. I watched how the chickens greedily pecked at the grain, how the rabbits calmly chewed grass, and how the cows lifted their heads when they heard the sound of a bucket approaching. Even when my hands got tired from carrying water, my heart felt light. It seemed like every small task connected me to the land, to the farm, to my grandfather. That day, I was happy. Maybe it's strange, but when I'm with Grandpa, I feel braver. In the evening, we sat on a bench next to the house. Grandpa rolled some tobacco, lit it, took a deep drag, and said, "You know, once the skies were ruled by dragons that even the greatest warriors feared. But they still moved forward until all of them were wiped out." Dragons? I asked hesitantly, unable to believe it. Seeing that he had caught my attention, he began telling stories from ancient times. I liked them so much that I soaked everything in like a sponge. That night, lying in bed, I couldn't fall asleep. I stared for a long time at the attic ceiling, barely lit by the moonlight, and began to dream that one day a dragon would come. It would ask me if I wanted to go on an adventure with it, and without hesitation I would jump onto its back. Maybe we would fly far away, beyond the village, beyond the forests, where the world my grandfather talks about begins. I would see mountains whose peaks hide in the clouds, lakes shining like mirrors, and cities where no one knows me. And the dragon would only occasionally turn its head toward me as if checking whether I'm afraid. And I wouldn't be afraid, because in that moment, I wouldn't be the boy who hides from school. I would be the one who dared to rise above his fears. 12:10, May 30th. Grandmother was the first to notice that I treat animals differently than most people do. She didn't need long to see it. Just a few moments were enough. Watching how carefully I held a small rabbit in my hands, or how patiently I waited for the chickens to come to the feed on their own. I never chased them or shouted at them, even when they ran away or refused to listen. It always seemed to me that they understand more than we think. When an animal got sick, it was hard for me to watch. I remember one time when a rabbit stopped eating. Others would just say, "It'll pass," or "That's just life." But I couldn't leave it at that. I sat beside it, observed it, trying to understand what was wrong. I brought fresh grass, water, even talked to it, even though I knew it wouldn't answer. Then my grandmother sat down next to me. She didn't say anything at first, just watched for a while. Then she quietly said, "Not everyone has the patience and the heart to care for those who cannot say what hurts them." After that, she began telling me about her work, how she treated animals, how sometimes she would go to the barn at night because one of them needed help, how not all of them could be saved. But she never spoke of it as a burden, more like a responsibility. She said animals trust people, even if they don't understand it. and that this trust is something important. You would make a good veterinarian, right? She said one evening as we were feeding the animals together. This time her words sounded different, not like a simple compliment, but something more serious, as if she could see something in me that I didn't yet understand myself. I didn't answer. I liked caring for them. I liked feeling that I could help someone. But at the same time, another world still lived in my mind, one full of knights, dragons, and battles. Sometimes it felt like those two worlds were completely different. One, quiet, calm, full of care. The other, dangerous, wild, full of adventure. And yet, somewhere deep inside, I began to wonder, maybe they are not so different after all. Maybe even knights need to know how to protect, not just how to fight. 1210, June 5th. I simply can't forget grandfather's stories about knights and dragons. They have lived in me longer than any lessons or the teasing of other children. One afternoon, as the sun was setting behind the forest and silence settled over the yard, I decided that I couldn't just dream, I had to act. Leaning against the barn wall was an old rake, its handle worn smooth by many years of work. Suddenly, I understood. This would be my sword. I cut the handle, scraped away the rough splinters with a knife until the wood became smoother and rested comfortably in my hands. Holding it, I felt how a simple piece of wood transformed in my imagination into a real knight's weapon. Not just a stick, but a sword with which I could face any enemy. I ran into the nearby forest. As I ran, I swung the stick like a sword, fighting invisible opponents. Sometimes I leapt over taller grass. Sometimes I turned around as if something were following me. My heart pounded, not from fear, but from excitement. I walked through the forest until I reached a clearing where it was bright. Sunlight fell directly onto the grass, and the air felt thicker, as if a dragon could truly land there. That's where I stopped. I stood with my feet apart, gripped my stick with both hands, and began the fight. I imagined a massive dragon standing before me. It roared, smoke pouring from its jaws, the ground trembling beneath its steps. I struck first. I swung the stick, blocked imaginary claws, stepped aside, fell, and rose again. Sometimes I shouted so loudly that I surprised even myself. In that moment, I was a warrior, the one who stands against what is frightening, even when his hands tremble. I felt something within me straighten, as if my spine grew stronger, as if my voice became deeper and braver. Every swing had meaning, every step carried weight. And though the clearing held nothing but grass and trees, to me it was a true battlefield. Here, it wasn't just the fate of an imaginary dragon being decided. I was fighting my fear, my doubts, that small voice in my head that said I wasn't strong enough. When I finally grew tired, I sat down on a stump. My hands were scratched, my shirt clung to my back, and my breathing was heavy and deep, as if I had truly fought not with imagination, but with a real dragon. My palms burned from gripping the stick, my knees were muddy, and my temples still pulsed. Around me it was quiet, only the wind softly rustled the leaves, as if applauding my effort. And yet inside I felt something new. Not just exhaustion. It was a strange pride in myself, a small but firm feeling that I could be stronger than I had thought. As if in that clearing, I had left behind a piece of my fear, and in its place carried back a bit of courage. 1210, July 10th. When haymaking season came, there was so much work that I grew tired just watching it. No matter how much I wanted to help, I was still too weak for serious tasks. I could lift a pitchfork, but after a few swings, my hands would start to tremble. Grandfather would just shake his head and say that my time would come. He often asked the neighbors for help. During haymaking, everyone helped each other. All I could do was trample the hay that had already been brought into the barn so more of it would fit. I climbed barefoot onto the soft piles and pressed them down until the hay settled more tightly. Dust rose into the air, tickling my nose, and in the evening, I would find small bits of straw in my hair, but I felt important, as if I were a small cog in a large farm. When the work was done, Grandmother would set the table in the orchard among the apple trees, a white tablecloth, steaming potatoes, bread, bacon, cucumbers. Grandfather would place his homemade beer on the table, dark, slightly bitter. It was like a reward for the neighbors' help. The men laughed loudly, talked about the harvest, the weather, and old times. Grandfather had one strange habit. When he felt he'd had enough, he would quietly stand up and go to sleep, leaving the others to celebrate. He would toss his clothes onto a chair, sigh, and fall asleep almost immediately. And sometimes I would go and check his pockets. Among the tobacco crumbs, which were always there, Grandfather also kept money. I would pull out a handful, blow away the tobacco dust, and only the coins would remain in my palm. I never took everything, just enough so that he wouldn't notice. And in my heart there stirred a strange feeling, a bit of guilt and a bit of curiosity about what would happen if one day he did notice. Haymaking evenings were long and smelled of grass. Lying in bed, I would hear the trees rustling outside the window, the quiet whisper of hay in the barn. And then I would think, maybe heroes are not born on the battlefield, but in places like this, among dusty haystacks, old stories, and warm summer evenings. 12:10, September 3rd. Sunday mornings were my favorite. We would wake up very early. Grandfather would have everything prepared the evening before: chicken eggs, homemade cheese, sour cream, meat, and vegetables packed into baskets. In the morning, he would just check if everything was in place, and he'd already be ready to leave. He called the market the local capital of exchange, saying that people traded not only goods there, but stories as well. We traveled by cart, pulled by an old but loyal horse. The road was long and full of bumps, but the horse patiently carried us forward, the wheels rhythmically rattling over the gravel. To me, it felt like a true adventure. I would sit beside him, and Grandfather would tell stories about how, in his own childhood, he used to go to the market with his father. Listening to him, I felt like part of something bigger, like a continuation you don't always fully understand, but feel deep in your heart. The market was full of smells, sounds, and faces. People waved, called out, greeted each other as if they had known one another for years. Everyone knew Grandfather. He always had a few regular customers waiting for the goods he brought. Sometimes he would give something away, just like that, because kindness always comes back. After the market, we would always stop by the same small shop where Grandfather would buy me chocolate candies. That day, he seemed to be in an especially good mood and decided to play a little trick on me. He handed me a nicely wrapped candy, and as always, I took it with a smile and put it in my pocket to save for later. Only in the evening, when I unwrapped the shiny paper instead of candy, I found a small stone. At first I was confused, then I looked at Grandfather. His eyes sparkled with playful joy. He loved such simple but unexpected pranks. He would eat the candy himself and use the empty wrapper as a gift. To him it was fun, and to me not just laughter but another quiet lesson, that not everything in life is as it seems at first glance, and sometimes the best way to respond to surprises is with a smile. 12:10, October 2nd. Today I received a completely unexpected gift. When my mother came back from school, she was holding a small basket. At first I thought it contained books or notebooks for her students, but suddenly the basket moved. A soft little squeak came from inside. She placed it on the table and carefully pulled back the cloth. Inside, curled up, lay a tiny puppy, so small it could barely fit in my hands. Its fur was a bright reddish color, with darker stripes along its sides and lighter, almost fluffy fur on its chest, like the mane of a little lion. Its tail was fluffy, its ears sharp and constantly twitching, and its eyes were large, shiny, and a little frightened. But you could already see curiosity in them. Mother told me that some people had left it by the school door, just set it down in the basket and walked away. I can't believe it. I don't understand how anyone could leave such a sweet animal so easily, as if it were an unwanted object. Thinking about it makes me feel sad and a little angry, but I also think of it another way. If those people hadn't left him, maybe he would never have ended up with us. I carefully picked the puppy up. At first he was trembling, but after a moment he rested his head against my chest and let out a quiet sigh. That's when I understood he would stay here, with us. I thought for a long time about what to name him. In the end, I decided his name would be Barsa. That's what our capital is called. Grandfather laughed and said it was a very serious name for such a small dog, but to me it fits perfectly. It feels like today our home became just a little more alive. November 8th, 1210. Barca is becoming braver with each passing day. As soon as I finish my chores, I take her outside and let her run around the yard. At first, she would timidly sniff the grass, but now she runs as if the whole yard belongs to her. Sometimes she starts chasing the chickens. They scatter in all directions, clucking in fear, while Barca dashes after them in small but very determined leaps. When the chickens finally scatter, she stops in the middle of the yard, lifts her head high, and walks proudly as if she has just won a great battle. Grandfather just smiles as he watches her and says that such a puppy could grow into a good guard dog. She just needs patience and to be trained from a young age. Sometimes he whistles and Barca immediately turns around, her ears standing straight as if trying to understand every word he says. Grandfather says that good dogs understand people not through words, but through voice and heart. At night, Barca usually sleeps with Mother. She finds a place by her bed or curls up near her feet, as if she knows that being close to Mother is the safest place in the world. Sometimes I wake up at night and hear her quietly whimpering in her sleep. Then I think that maybe she still remembers the day she was left by the school, but now she has a home, and I think she already understands that. December 14th, 1210. Winter has come. When the snow covered the ground, it felt as though time in our homestead had slowed a little. The fields where we worked from morning until evening in summer now lay white and silent. There was less work on the farm. Animals still needed feeding, water had to be carried, and the barn cleaned. But everything happened more calmly, without the rush of summer. In the evenings, the house was warm from the stove, and outside the snow creaked beneath the cold. Perhaps it was that quiet that slowly awakened in me a desire to better understand the world I live in. I think Grandfather's stories played a part in it, too. His tales of ancient warriors, knights, and dragons kept turning in my mind. Sometimes it felt as if they were not just stories, but something more, like long-forgotten memories of a time when the world was different. One evening, I went into Mother's room. There, against the wall, stood a shelf full of various books. Some were thick and old, others thinner with yellowed pages. I carefully ran my fingers along their spines and began looking for something about history. I wanted to know whether those dragons and knights had ever truly existed. I picked up one book and opened it. The pages were filled with small text, almost without any illustrations. I read a few lines, but quickly grew tired. I'm not much of a reader. I put it back and picked up another, and so I went from one book to the next until I finally found one that I truly liked. It had pictures, large, colorful ones. They showed knights in shining armor, wizards with long staffs, and enormous dragons soaring above the towers of castles. I looked at those drawings for a long time, as if trying to imagine how it would all look in reality. The book also said that in our capital lives a queen named Gaia. According to the book, she has ruled since the creation of the world, or at least that is what the old legends claim. I don't know how much of that is true, but as I sat by the light of a candle turning those pages, I felt my curiosity growing. The world beyond our homestead suddenly seemed much larger than I had ever imagined. And for the first time, I thought, maybe one day I will see that capital myself. Maybe I will see the Queen's palace. Or perhaps I will even learn whether dragons ever truly flew across our skies. March 28th, 1211. At last, spring has come. After the long winter, the air grew warmer, the snow slowly melted, and the days became longer. It felt as though the whole world was gradually waking from a long sleep. The first green shoots began pushing up from the ground, and in the mornings the meadows smelled of wet grass and thawing earth. Even the birds had returned. Their songs once again echoed across the fields. With spring, my desire for adventures in the forest returned as well. During winter, I often thought about it, but the snow and cold made it impossible to wander long among the trees. Now I could finally go back to where the paths wind between old pines and where every clearing looks like a small battlefield. This morning, I eagerly packed my bag. I wanted to be ready for a real adventure. I took my diary, the same notebook my mother gave me for my birthday. I thought that if something interesting happened, I could write it down right away. I also packed a few sandwiches and a flask of water because grandfather always says it's better to go into the forest prepared. Only this time, I am no longer alone. Now I have a companion, Barsa. As soon as we left the yard, her nose stayed close to the ground, as if she were trying to take in every scent of the forest at once. She would run a little ahead, then stop, turn back to me, and wait until I caught up, as if checking that I was still with her. In the forest, she becomes completely different from how she is in the yard. There she is braver, faster, full of curiosity. Sometimes she suddenly freezes, her ears standing straight, staring somewhere into the bushes. Maybe a hare ran by, or maybe it was just the wind moving the branches. Then she leaps forward and runs as if she were a true hunter, though most of the time she only catches her own shadow. After my imaginary battles, I sat down on a large stone in the middle of a clearing to eat the sandwiches I had brought. Barsa was running nearby when she suddenly froze, her ears shot up, her body tensed. At that moment, something large flew over our heads. Its shadow briefly blocked the sun across the entire clearing. At first, I thought it might be a large bird or a cloud, but soon I noticed a strange smell in the air, like smoke. My heart began to pound, and I felt that something was wrong. I jumped up from the stone and ran out of the forest, with Barsa racing after me. When I reached the fields, I saw a sight I will never forget. The village and the surrounding lands were burning. Flames rose high into the sky and smoke covered the entire horizon. In the distance, I saw the same silhouette I had glimpsed above the forest. It was a dragon. I instinctively took a few steps forward, wanting to run toward home, toward the yard where my mother, grandfather, and grandmother were waiting for me. But the closer I got, the more I felt the heat. The fire was so intense that I had to stop. The flames rose higher than the rooftops, and sparks shot into the sky like red birds. The fire climbed high into the heavens, and the smoke blanketed the horizon. I stood frozen, unable to understand how a creature I had admired so much in my dreams could destroy everything that was so dear to me. The village and my home, everything was engulfed in flames. My legs began to tremble, and I fell to my knees. Barsa, as if sensing what was happening inside me, pressed close to my side. In that moment, it felt as though everything was over.